Hi, I'm Pastor Eric from Trinity Lutheran Church. I want to invite you into a conversation called Gospel Connections, where we explore deeper a theme from this past Sunday's worship service. This past Sunday, we talked about healing and how one can experience healing from Jesus' perspective. Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, the first chapter, goes on to heal Simon's mother-in-law from a fever she was experiencing, in addition to healing those who were sick and possessed by demons, as the gospel story goes. It's also an opportunity for us to explore together stories from modern times about how Jesus conducts healing of the body, mind, and soul, as well as how healing has an expansive reality, and it can include God's presence with strength and comfort in times of suffering, and God's promise of wholeness and peace, not necessarily healing to a full recovery, or doesn't necessarily include a cure. But Jesus' healing is ever present and expansive in the reality in which we live. I invite you this morning or today to explore with me another layer of healing. And these are the wounds that we receive. Sometimes, and I mentioned sometimes, a wound that we receive can equip us to better serve our community, better serve those in our congregation and in this world. Not always, but sometimes. So it's an opportunity for us to look at how, if we're wounded, whether that's literally or figuratively, whether that's physically or emotionally, as we heal from that wound, we grow stronger, and then we can connect empathetically with others. I want to start by sharing a story of a figurative example of healing, and then connect it to how it can be applied literally out in our world and community this day. It's an old Irish tale that comes from the book called Finding Your Wild, written by Dan Dolquist. And it's a Christian book that reflects on finding your true self and identifying your false self as we navigate through the world. But he writes in chapter 13 this following story and shares this story. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a king in Ireland. Ireland had lots of small kingdoms in those days, and this kingdom was one among many. The king and kingdom were quite ordinary, and nobody paid much attention to them. One day, the king received a huge, beautiful diamond from a relative who had died. It was the largest diamond anyone had ever seen. It dazzled everyone. The other kings began to pay attention to him. If he had a diamond like this, he must be special. The people came from afar and wide to see the diamond. The king had it on constant display in a glass box so that all who wished could see and admire it. Of course, armed guards kept a constant vigil. The kingdom proposed, and the king attributed all his good fortune to the diamond. One day, a nervous guard asked to see the king. He was visibly shaken and told the king some terrible news. The diamond had developed a flaw. A crack ran right down the middle. The king was horrified and ran to the glass box to see for himself. It was true. The diamond was now terribly flawed. He called all the jewelers in the land to ask their advice, but they all gave him bad news. The flaw was so deep that if they were to sand the diamond down, they would grind it practically to nothing. And if they tried to split it into two substantial stones, it easily might shatter into 1,000,000 fragments. As the king was pondering these terrible options, an old jeweler who had arrived from the farthest part of the kingdom said, "If you will give me a week with that stone, I think I can fix it." The king didn't believe him because the other jewelers were so sure it couldn't be fixed. But the old man was insistent. The king relented. Having no better solution, the king agreed to let the elderly jeweler work, but he wouldn't let the diamond out of his castle. The jeweler said that would be all right. He could work there, and guards could stand outside the room where he was working. For a week, the king and the guards hovered about, hearing scratching and gentle pounding and grinding. They wondered what the old man was doing and what would happen if he was tricking them. When the week was up, the jeweler came out of the room. King and guards rushed in to see the man's work, and the king burst into tears of joy. It was better. The old man had carved a perfect rose on the top of the diamond, with the crack that ran down the inside as the stem of the rose. When the Irish tell this story, they say that this is the way God heals us. God takes our deepest wound and turns it and us into something beautiful. So as I think of that story, and I think of a personal wound or something that I experienced and how that's equipped me to better connect with others who may be in need, I think of experiencing the death of a close loved one and going and journeying through them during their end-of-life experience. It's painful. At times, it's emotional. It's difficult. You can be angry, sad, frustrated, and all of the above. In my particular case, after that person died, I began to heal. Began to heal because I was a part of a community and I was able to talk and connect with others, not right away, but on my own time. And what I realized was through that healing and seeing God's promises communicated and lived out in that person who died and in my own life, as I continued to heal, I realized that I was better equipped and could better empathetically serve those who were experiencing sadness, grief, and sorrow because of a person that they lost, a loved one that died that they were really close to. And it better equipped me, and that continued to help my healing as I could relate and understand what they were going through. And sometimes it wasn't the words that I said, and sometimes it was just being present. And I'm giving myself as an example, not because I'm special, just because I'm like everyone else. And as we experience, sometimes wounds can be turned into something beautiful that we can use to serve someone else and understand what they're going through. There's an infinite amount of examples in this world, and mine is nothing special. But it ties back to what that story said. It took a wound, and sometimes wounds can be turned into sacred wounds and be used to help us serve others in need. It's a term called wounded healer. It's healing for both that person in need and also the person that's doing the serving. Again, it's nothing special. This is something through God's grace that I experienced, and I only want to be able to pay forward. And I'm sure some of you have experiences that match that you've been able to use to empathetically help and support others in need. And I just invite you to reflect on that, lift that up if that situation applies to you. Well, I look forward to continue to stay in touch. Leave any comments that you'd like to share, and we can have a discussion if you'd like. And I hope that you have a blessed week. God bless, and see you next week.